Hey everybody, welcome to episode 7 of our FM COVID-19 webinar series. This week we decided to do something a little different and reach back out to the expert panelists to answer your questions. And just like all the other episodes, you'll be able to find this episode and any of the past episodes in IFMA's Coronavirus Resource Center by going to ifma.org/coronavirus. Now with that, let's go ahead and jump into the Q&A.
Good morning from Copenhagen, Denmark. My name is Peter Ankerstjerne. I'm the first vice chair of the IFMA board of directors. And in my day job, I'm the global lead of facility management and workplace experience for JLL. This is a short follow-up where we can answer a few questions from the work from home webinar series that we did a couple of weeks ago. And the first question comes from Karen Applebaum. If remote works become more normalized, do you think certain jobs will become less essential, such as a receptionist? And yes, there's no doubt that as we are working from home extensively, both now, but also when we are bringing people back into the office, this will change the setup around facilities management and the services that we are providing to a certain extent. We'll bring people back to the office in a more phased approach, probably starting as low as 20 to 30% of the workforce that will come back to the office, and it will vary from industry to industry, but in general that will probably be the level. And obviously we don't need the same amount of receptionists, we don't need the same amount of cleaners, although cleaning is changed and being prioritized around the hygienic and disinfection issues. But also catering, back of house type of services. So I think around the maintenance and managing the building, we'll still need to do that as the building is still there. But some of the services will have to change, and we'll probably have to downsize a certain number of the services and the resources that we have available. The next question comes from Eduardo Bourbon. What are some tips on how to manage the implementation of working from home practices? And how do we avoid the fear of losing control and still maintaining the productivity of the workforce? I think a lot of companies are dealing with these types of issues, but I also think that what we have seen so far is actually that a lot of companies are reporting back that their productivity levels have increased while people are working from home. So the big experiment that we're all part of in the home working scenario is actually, it seems to work. It does require a different leadership style. Working from home requires a higher level of trust, and in order to gain that trust and earn that trust from your team, and also vice versa from your team to your leader, you need to focus on other things. It's more the outcome or the output of the work that's being done, the quality of the work that's being done, rather than how much hours are you putting in and what's the face time, what is the input, which I think we have probably been used to managing like that when we're at the office. Secondly, it requires a different level of communications, that you have to check in with your teams more regularly. You have to communicate more on a more frequent basis with your team, and especially when you have virtual project teams that are working on these things, that you have to be part of that as a leader. So in order to gain that level of trust and work in a new way. So it does require some change in working from home. Then we have a question from Maximilian Ayu. Do you think that FM will see an uptick in digitalization efforts across the globe because of remote monitoring? And I think the short answer is yes. I think the FM industry has been on a path of digitalizing and using technology in the way we're operating for a while now. But I think COVID-19 and the crisis that we've been through will probably see an uptick in those types of initiatives. Even to an extent where you can talk about a tipping point. I think we will see a lot of change around technology, both in remote working and monitoring, but also once we get back to the office, where we need to use hand-free devices. We need to automate a lot of the interfaces that we have been used to. The final question comes from Alim Yap. How do we set effective boundaries around work time and personal time? Are we heading to a 24-hour workday? And I think hopefully not. I think it's a great question. I think a lot of people are struggling with this, not because you're working too little, but because you're working too much, and we are always on. So I think it's a lot to do with leadership again, how you manage your team and make sure you set those boundaries, and those boundaries are quite clear, and you manage the expectation, but also around self-discipline, that you actually have time where you're on work and you have time where you're off work, and you balance that approach on a continuous level. So this is quite important.
Hello, I'm Lucy Jeans. I'm the Managing Director from Larch Consulting in the UK. The first question is from Mike Kelly. Mike asks, will there be a greater focus on the importance and greater awareness of the role of FM professionals following COVID-19? Do you think an increase in cleaning, security and other facility services will be accounted for? Now, I think at the moment we are really being recognised as providing an essential service and adding value, particularly in respect of cleaning and security services, but also keeping the buildings compliant and making sure that they're going to be operational when we move back into them. Let's hope that that value that we're adding continues to be recognised and reflected. I think when we go back to work in the new normal, the social distancing side of things, then there will be a real emphasis on what we're doing. I think that that will drop away probably as things come back to the old kind of normal. Let's hope that in the pressures of the new economy, we are still able to provide all the things that we know need to be done in order to keep the workplace safe. Realistically, I would say that perhaps if we are taking up more operational expenditure now, we might find that some of that is going to be at the expense of some of our capital projects and programmes that we were planning for later. But I think that's just going to be the way of the world for a while, isn't it? This is a question from Pamela O'Reilly. What recommendations do you have for service providers to stay engaged with their clients during this time? Many are dealing with FM emergencies, and I want them to know that I'm still here to support them while respecting their time. Well, we've got two approaches here. You're absolutely right. People are busy at work, and then when they're not busy, they're tied up at home, dealing with their families and all the nightmares that they have to deal with, like shopping and that sort of thing. So there are two ways to keep in touch. I think the first one is by email, because that means that people can look at that when it's suitable for them and when it's convenient. And I think without bombarding people, you want to keep in contact with them, particularly letting them know what you can do to support and help them. And I don't mean a big sales initiative. There's nothing more irritating, I don't think, than people who look like they are taking advantage of this situation to try and sell additional services. But if you know that your organisation can provide services that are helpful, that perhaps your client didn't know about before, then it would be useful to inform them about those. The second way to keep in touch, of course, is like this, is to book a call with them. And I think rather than just ring them, you want to book a time that is convenient for them to have a little catch up on video. You need that face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact, because that's how we connect with people. And as long as you are leaving it to them to decide when is convenient and you're keeping it short, if you know that they're busy, then again, that's very helpful. How are you getting on? Anything we can do, anything we can support you with. Here are some learnings from other clients that we have that you might find interesting. Don't book a call with somebody unless you genuinely have something to say to them or something to discuss. What they're looking for is adding value. So either that's information, knowledge, good practice, tips, techniques, something you can offer them that doesn't involve lots of additional payment, all of those things, which we know, of course, are the way to have a good relationship anyway. This is a question from Sumit Bhattacharjee. After opening the office and doing all sorts of sanitisation and other activities to restore operation, how do we communicate to our employees to build trust and assure them of the safety level of the office and the workplace? Now, that's down to the level of detail that we go into in respect of communication. Very often in the past, people haven't really been very interested in knowing very much at all about how we clean the office, when we clean it, or what we do. That's completely different now. We need to provide people about the insurance on social distancing, but that's going to be quite clearly set out when people are coming back to work, what they can do, where they can go, and how it's going to work. What needs to be communicated explicitly and clearly from the facilities team is about the hygiene regime, how often that happens, what happens, and information perhaps that people wouldn't have been interested in before about the kind of materials and approaches that are used, as well as the frequencies. There are two sets of guidance that you can use here. There's industry guidance, such as is coming out from IFMA, or in the UK from the RICS, where we are trying to provide guidance, templates and standards on how these things ought to be done. And then another approach that you might look at is independent third-party checking. So some sort of external independent accreditation, like the system that Sitemark offer in the UK. So it's worth looking into whether something like that is available where you are, or in fact, whether you can develop something yourselves and then bring someone else into audit to make sure that's happening. So you've got that extra level of assurance.
Hi everybody, Wayne Weitzel, Executive Vice President with DFS Green. I lead our Workplace Health Services Division, and I am here to answer some viewer-submitted questions to IFMA HQ. So let's get to our next question. What should I do in the event we have an employee test positive for COVID? Okay, you need to have that process in place before the person tests positive for COVID. Right now, you should be formulating plans with your other peers in your other divisions in HR, in legal, and so forth to develop what that plan is going to look like. You know, remember, if you've taken your CFM exam, one of the questions, or the questions on there, tend to say, what should you do in the event of such and such a catastrophe? And the answer is always follow the emergency response plan. We need to have that plan for this. So get with HR and legal and so forth and find out how you're going to handle that. And then that will inform a lot of what the process of disinfection is going to look like. And the response is going to look like. Now, when it comes to disinfecting active COVID, there's two points of concern here. Number one, by far, is protecting the people that are going in to remediate the active area. So that's us. So we need to be protected. Our people need to go in and not be susceptible to catching the virus in that area. So that means much more aggressive on the PPE. Okay, so you got with regular prevention, you can follow the PPE guidelines for your organization, at least meeting CDC minimum requirements for PPE and or what's on the labeling in SDS of your disinfectant. But when it comes to active COVID, it's full Tyvek, it's full respirator, it's everything. It's the whole kit and caboodle, booties, everything. And that's the most important thing. The second most important thing in an active case is to not migrate that contamination to uncontaminated areas in the facility. So the area to be remediated is taken care of, and then anything that's been in that area, the PPE that people are wearing, the equipment that's been used, the spray bottles, everything needs to be contained before leaving that remediated area that was once contaminated. So there's rules for how we take off our PPE. We call it doffing. The opposite of donning. We take off our PPE in a very certain way to avoid contamination. There's a lot of rules about how we take care of hand hygiene with and without gloves, and there's steps that we follow to ensure we're always touching with a clean hand or a clean gloved hand, depending on what you're talking about. So all of that has to occur, because picture if you don't do that, right? Let's say the crew goes in and they do a great job of disinfecting, but they walk out in their Tyvek and their equipment. And meanwhile, this stuff has come in contact potentially with areas that are affected. So now we've taken that contamination and we're carrying it with us through the facility, into the van, taking it to the warehouse, taking it home. And there you have a migration of that problem. So those are the two big differences with an active COVID case. when you get an active reported case, you need to be honest with your whoever's treating this, whatever subject matter expert is doing this. You need to you don't want to not tell them this is an active case. They need to know that. Okay, that person or people, whoever was, who tested positive for this, had a path of travel into your facility where they came in. And if you can identify that path of travel with utter specificity, that's going to help you to say, okay, so Susie came in, she went to the reception desk and used the wayfinding signs. She then used one of the elevators. She went up to the 4th floor, went to her area where she benches with a bunch of other people. She used the copy room, the restroom, the kitchen, and let's assume, she walked all over the floor. Did she go to another floor? Did she use the back stairwell? What did she do? If you can't get definitive answers, if Susie can't tell you, no, I never left the 5th floor, I was here, the past 2 days. If you can't get definitive answers, then your area of potentially affected areas becomes much wider. So once you get that path of travel down, your SME will know specifically where to focus that rigor and that protocol around those areas. And then what you need to determine is how far out of a radius do you want to go with preventive additional disinfection. Do you need to treat the whole facility all over again in this case? That's a process you're going to have to go through with HR and legal to determine what you want to do there. If you can say, no, Susie didn't go to the 12th floor, well, why would you do the 12th floor? But if your process and your protocol internally says that that's what you're going to do, then you do that. But bear in mind, path of travel and identifying that for the remediation people that are doing this work, that's important for you to give them that information.
Hi, this is Don Ricker. I'm a strategy director at Gensler, and we have some great questions for you today. The first question comes to us from John Carey. So John asks, will companies be making more private offices and getting rid of the open cubicle plan? For example, headquarters spaces. So John, that's a good question. And I'm sure like everybody, there's a lot of reactions out there right now where one might begin to think the response to an open environment where people might be near one another on a regular basis is, the pendulum swing is to start building more offices. So we're not thinking that it's going to go in that direction. And in fact, what we've started to learn from our work from home survey is that there's certainly going to be a new mix within the work environment, and that ultimately it has to support the individual as well as the teams and make sure that it's an effective place for them. So things like the activities that people will perform or the work styles that they have become incredibly important to what the space will look like. And we know that those activities are going to change. Back in 2019, Gensler released the workplace survey, and one of the biggest findings was, over 70% of the people were found the open work environment was most effective when it had a good balance of a combination of spaces. So we definitely see that going forward, and I think this idea of balance is going to be even more important as we start to think about what the return to work looks like. Some of the early findings from the work from home survey are that people are missing collaboration in by working at home. It might be virtual, but there's nothing like face-to-face interaction. There's nothing like the ability to be near colleagues, not just for collaboration, but also for those social and cultural aspects. So we think that the workplace is going to take on an even greater importance to that effect, in which case we would expect to find more amenities and other spaces where people can come together on top of collaborating and working. But there's other things that people miss. They miss bigger screens and technology. They miss ergonomic chairs. So all those things become important to the mix of a work from home strategy with what the new work environment looks like. But ultimately, we don't see the increase in private offices being the solution, but rather, a mix of things that are going to follow based on the research and based on the findings and the behaviors as people get back into the workplace. So thanks for your question, John. I hope that helped answer everything you need. We have another question here from Cecile. Cecile writes, How are companies handling distancing at collaboration areas, conference rooms, cafeterias, and break rooms? What does directional signage look like in main hallways? So a couple good questions there, Cecile. So with respect to collaboration, we're definitely anticipating de-densification of collaboration. So just like the work environment, the desking area, we can put that concept of 6 feet distancing between people. And a good rule of thumb right now is in closed rooms or closed areas, expect about half the density that you have today. You can also expect maybe increasing density, however, in open collaboration. So I think open versus closed has different sets of rules around it. While the 6-foot rule is, currently what we're anticipating and leveraging for measuring. Open collaboration does give you a little bit more elbow room. It might allow people to stand as opposed to sit. So that's an opportunity to sort of offset meeting spaces that you may be reducing by half and being able to leave the other ones maybe as is, but spreading the seats out and allowing people to stand. The other part of your question is with respect to what I'd call the social areas. So those social spaces like cafeterias and break rooms. So some of the thinking around that, is leveraging large tables that you may have in a cafeteria as opposed to a bunch of small tables. And the reason for that is, as we think about what our work from home survey is telling us is that the work environment is still meant to be a social and a collaborative space. And this idea of large tables, but with seats spread apart at the large table, allows people to feel like they're still together in the work environment or at break. The smaller tables tend to represent more of that isolation and that solitude, but you can certainly leverage those smaller tables in cafeterias as a place for people to sit and maybe just do focus work. But ultimately, the large tables would allow for that more of that social connection. Connected to that is also things like food and food service. We're not seeing a lot of organizations open the cafeteria for food service right now, and the expectation is that food would be probably prepackaged and or delivered. So there might be deliveries, and the cafeteria may be getting used in a different way, less about the kitchen and less about the prep and more about delivery and boxed lunches kind of a thing. So we're hearing more of that. With respect to signage, another good question. So we look at signage a couple ways. It has to be both directional as well as informational. And especially with people coming back to the work environment after being at home for so long, there's new rules in place. And so those informational signs are just as important as directional signage. But with respect to directional signage, if this is at all helpful, Gensler has our space management tool, WISP, which is currently has an exit signage component to it that we are repurposing, and we're able to use it now for both directional and informational signage. So it helps you with mapping it on the plan, identifying what it is, what it needs to say. So it's a great tool, and it's included with some of the footnotes to this recording. So you can feel free to check that out. So thanks for your questions, Cecile. I hope that helped answer your questions. This next question comes from Ron Cognetta. Ron asks, how do you envision entering and exiting densely populated high-rise buildings, such as those in New York, while maintaining social distancing? For example, 800 people in a building, 6 elevators, each elevator has a new capacity, etc. So yeah, it's a good question, Ron. And there's a lot of urban centers like New York that are going to be faced with this challenge. So the short answer is the choreography between the building and the tenants is going to be critical to how that building is going to work and how it needs to work. The best advice we have right now is to consider different staggering of your staff, or different shifts, creating assigned times or spots when you can imagine an entire organization 1 at a time, or 3 at a time, or 4 at a time, kind of filling out the lobby and being screened and then going to the elevators. So you'll have to look at arrival sequence, you'll have to look at food delivery sequence, you'll have to look at visitor sequence, you'll have to look at a departure sequence. So there's a lot to figure out, and it's going to vary, right, from building to building. based on size of lobby, what that lobby capacity looks like. You're going to have to look at elevator cab size as well. And there are a variety of different dimensions that allow from 2 to 3 people using social distancing that can fit in standard cabs. But we also have to consider traditional elevators versus destination dispatch. So all of these are a lot of variables to figure out. And the answer is start looking at, one organization at a time, start to get the sizes of those lobbies, start to understand what a queue looks like with 6-foot distancing. And I think the results will be evident once you start to kind of do the math or do the work. Other things to consider are opening up the stairs and watching and seeing if you can't offload elevator capacity with stairwells. So certainly anybody in the 1st through 4th or 5th floors could be leveraging the stairs. So that might alleviate some of the congestion, and you might be able to think about different ways to stagger elevators in the building in that sense by allowing people to walk up or down a set of flights to get to a floor where they could leverage that as a staging area. So again, lots of opportunities, but I think it just requires doing a couple studies of the individual building, and there's plenty of folks out there who can start adding to that and help you out. I hope that helped answer some questions, Ron. We have another question here from Joe Duran. Joe asks, do you think this is being designed for long-term or a fix for us to get through the current back-to-work protocols? How much will working from home have a long-term effect on space needs going forward? All right, so Joe, a couple good questions there. So let's talk about this I'm going to call it in the now, near, far. So let's call phase 1 the now. That is definitely where we're at right now in the quick fix. How do we get people back? So a couple things about that. We're thinking that the now has sort of a 90-day period on it. From the moment you start to get back to work, you're going to be putting a lot of things in place. All the planning is happening right now. All of the interventions that we've been discussing as part of our webinar are very much to help get everyone's heads around what has to happen in the immediate. So think of everything from that point of view that you've seen thus far. There's a lot of great planning tools out there. Gensler has one. It's called Rerun. It's going to apply social distancing to your existing plans. It will help you kind of get your head around what your occupancy might look like. So there's stuff out there to help you with the now. The next part of this is kind of that near, so that we'll call it phase 2. So let's assume you get everybody back in. You've got about a 90-day window of figuring out what does a full migration look like coming back to the workplace. At the same time, you are testing out some of your work from home approaches. So it's those sort of 60 to 90 days following that get back to work, that phase 1, that you're going to start to learn, and we're going to see new behavior shifting. So we're thinking phase 2, the near, is going to last anywhere from a year to 18 months. And with that is it's going to come there's going to be some additional changes to the work environment. So that's where protocols and processes will get in place. But the changes to the work environment are going to be very much about repurposing. It's going to be taking what you have and modifying it, and people will start to get used to kind of that new mode of working and seeing the space maybe take on very small but hopefully impactful changes. What you would expect to learn out of that will certainly begin to inform more of the FAR. And I think it's during phase 2 that we should begin planning for that FAR. So let's say phase 3 is the FAR. So after your next year of post-COVID work environments and all the lessons learned and the work from home policies and strategies, people are going to start to understand how they're really going to be using their space. We'll have new behaviors, we'll have new activities, we'll begin to reinforce what the workplace means. And we know that it's about a social interaction. We know that it's about culture and brand of an organization. But for the teams that work there, it's got to be about effectiveness and productivity. And so we expect we're going to have to learn what being effective and productive means over the course of the next year and a half, while teams migrate both from work from home and in the work environment. So start planning for phase 3 during phase 2. So we've got a couple more questions here that have some quick, brief answers. So I'll try to lump them all together here. So when people go back to work, is it better to have people assigned to a desk or look at free address as an option? So I think the answer is both. Strategies like having an assigned versus a free address desk is part of the mix today, right? So I think people are going to expect that it'll still be there tomorrow. And right now we're hearing different ideas around from different companies that are looking at assigned desks for certain teams, like anybody who's assigned to the back to work processes and protocols having assigned desks, because they're probably going to be there for the majority of the week or majority of the time. So it makes sense that they have their own desk. So that might be your operations team, your facilities team, your IT team, folks like that, HR, perhaps anybody who needs to be easy to find. And there's a couple tools out there that can help you with looking at what percentage of assigned or what percentage of unassigned, and what that impact might be to your occupancy. One of the tools that Gensler offers is the WISP tool. That's our space management tool. And within it, it allows you to run scenarios. It allows you to take certain desks sort of off the plan and assign them, and others to apply ratios. So it's a great tool that can help you figure out what your potential occupancy looks like. It can help you figure out, what does a wave or a shift of people look like. And it also helps ease confusion by creating a plan where you can give somebody their assigned seat or their zone or area to work for the day. So hopefully that helps. There's going to be some links at the end of this presentation where you can find more of those resources.
Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We currently do have our World Workplace Europe event going on May 6th through the 8th. You can find more information on that at worldworkplaceeurope.ifma.org. Also, we'll be back here next week with episode number 8, How to Prepare in the Event of a Relapse or Reclosure. So that'll be Wednesday the 13th at 10 a.m. Central. And the IFMA Foundation has updated their pandemic preparedness manual, so you'll be able to find more information on that on the IFMA Foundation website, as well as in IFMA's Knowledge Library. Thank you so much again for watching, and we'll see you back here next week.